The morning had barely begun when the old wooden gates creaked open, letting in the first horse of the auction. A strange hush fell over the crowd, as if even the wind had paused to watch. Cormac Julep, his weathered cowboy hat pulled low over his brow, glanced up from the clipboard in his hands, and froze. The horse being led in was gaunt, limping, his dark coat patchy with dried mud and scars. But it wasn't his injuries that brought silence. It was his eyes. They didn't just look, they pierced. Iris Hargrove sat in the third row, her fingers clenched tightly around the top of her cane. The worn leather of her boots creaked as she leaned forward. She'd seen eyes like that before, after the fire, after the war, after the accident no one ever spoke of. That wasn't the look of pain. It was the look of someone who'd survived something unspeakable. One of the handlers muttered the horse's name as if afraid to say it too loud. Bishop. When he stepped into the center ring, no one moved. No one bid. No one even coughed. They just stared. Delphine Waverley, wrapped in a faded quilted shawl, exchanged a glance with her granddaughter, Maisie, who sat beside her clutching a cup of hot cocoa. The girl, no older than 11, was wide-eyed, but not afraid. She didn't flinch. In fact, she seemed drawn to Bishop in a way no one else could quite understand. Delphine whispered something under her breath, something about old souls and second chances, but Maisie didn't respond. She was too busy locking eyes with the wounded animal no one seemed to want. At the far end of the auction grounds, Thatcher Hargrove stood with his hands deep in his coat pockets, not even sure why he'd come. He hadn't spoken to his mother in over 6 years, and now here he was, standing a dozen yards away from her, watching her stare at a broken horse like he was some kind of ghost. Bishop, he thought. What kind of name was that for a horse? And why did it feel like the animal was looking straight into him, past all the years and resentment, down to the boy he used to be? Near the holding pens, Hezekiah Zeke Rourke leaned against a post, arms crossed, heart heavy. He'd helped unload Bishop that morning. The horse hadn't made a sound. Not a single neigh, not a stomp, not even a breath too loud. Just that awful, hollow stare. Zeke had seen horses in bad shape before, but none that looked like they'd already given up. Bishop wasn't angry. He was empty. And then something shifted. Bishop turned his head, slowly, scanning the crowd. And when his eyes landed on Iris, on that one broken soul brave enough to meet his gaze, a single tear rolled down her cheek. Not from sadness, but because in that one moment she knew this wasn't just a horse. This was a mirror. Iris hadn't cried in years. Not at the funeral. Not during the surgeries. Not even when the doctors gave her that long, quiet look before saying Thatcher might not make it back. But standing there, in the middle of a cold Tennessee morning, her heart cracked without warning. Bishop's eyes held something ancient, not just pain, but recognition. She gripped the cane tighter as her knees nearly buckled. That horse wasn't just looking at her. He knew her. Or, at least, he reminded her of someone she'd tried so hard to forget. From across the paddock, Thatcher noticed the change in her. He didn't need to see her face up close. The way her shoulders trembled was enough. It startled him. The woman who raised him had always been iron. Stern, silent, full of rules and withheld affection. But now, for the first time in his adult life, he saw her break. It didn't make sense. What was it about this horse? And why did something in his own chest feel suddenly tight, like a string being pulled from a place he'd buried? Delphine watched it all like a hawk. She wasn't the type to believe in signs, at least that's what she told people. But deep down, she believed some souls returned in other forms. She'd seen too many things in her lifetime to ignore the strange echoes that sometimes passed between beings. Maisie tugged at her sleeve, whispering, "Nana, do you think he's sad?" Delphine glanced at her granddaughter's face. There wasn't fear there. There was recognition, too. "No, baby," she answered softly. He's not sad. He's waiting. Back at the auction stand, Cormac cleared his throat, finally breaking the silence. "Starting bid for Bishop at $50, he muttered into the mic, his voice dry. No one moved. No hands raised. People glanced at each other awkwardly, some shifting in their seats, others looking away, unable to meet Bishop's gaze. The horse hadn't moved once. Just stood, scarred and silent, as if the world could fall apart around him and he wouldn't flinch. Zeke Rourke, watching from the sidelines, cursed under his breath. "Damn shame," he mumbled. He knew what happened to horses that didn't sell. Especially ones like Bishop, wounded, silent, too proud to beg. They were written off, carted away, never spoken of again. But something inside him twisted. He'd seen men in combat with that same look. Eyes that said, "I've already been through hell. Don't send me back." Then, out of nowhere, a voice cut through the heavy air. "I'll take him." The room turned. Iris had spoken, her voice steady, her eyes wet. And for the first time since Bishop had arrived, he moved his head toward her. For a few seconds, no one seemed to breathe. Iris Hargrove's voice still lingered in the cold morning air like smoke from a long-dead fire. She had spoken with a conviction no one expected from a woman her age, especially not one who hadn't said more than 10 words in public in years. Bishop turned his head fully now, facing her directly, as if acknowledging her decision. It wasn't a look of gratitude. It was something quieter, something closer to relief. Thatcher felt his stomach twist. He hadn't heard his mother speak like that in over a decade. Not since the night they last argued, the night he left without looking back. Watching her now, he didn't know what unsettled him more, that she'd offered to take in a horse clearly beyond saving, or that the horse seemed to understand. He crossed his arms, his jaw tight, silently questioning if she even remembered how to care for something so broken. Then again, maybe she was broken too, and that's what drew her to him. Cormac Julep recovered quickly, tapping the mic with the back of his hand. "Sold," he said, a bit too fast, slamming the gavel before anyone could change their mind. "To Iris Hargrove, for $50. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some looked at her with sympathy, others with confusion. But no one said a word aloud. No one challenged it. No one dared. There was something sacred about what had just happened, and no one wanted to be the fool who ruined it. Maisie clapped softly, her little hands muffled by the sleeves of her wool coat. "She saved him," she whispered to Delphine, who nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on Iris. But Delphine saw something else too. Not just a woman taking in a wounded horse, but a mother trying to mend something that had cracked long ago. Her eyes shifted toward Thatcher, who stood rigidly near the edge of the auction grounds, staring at his mother like he didn't recognize her anymore. Behind the stables, Zeke watched Bishop being led out of the ring. For the first time that day, the horse lifted his head. Not high, but just enough to notice. Zeke narrowed his eyes. "You're not done yet," he muttered under his breath. "You've got something left in you. And she just gave you a second chance." He spit into the dirt, turned, and disappeared behind the barn, unsure why he cared so much. As Bishop passed Iris on the way out, their eyes met again, this time longer. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Because somewhere deep in her chest, behind all the years and silence and pain, she felt it. She hadn't just saved him. He had come to save her too. The trailer ride back to the farm was quiet, except for the occasional rattle of the horse trailer behind Iris's old pickup. Bishop didn't make a sound. He stood perfectly still during the entire drive, as if being moved didn't matter to him anymore. Iris glanced at the side mirror every few minutes, not out of concern, but out of something deeper, a need to make sure he was still there. She didn't know what she was going to do with him. Her barn was barely standing, and her hands weren't as steady as they once were. But she knew this much: He wasn't going back. Thatcher followed her the whole way, driving 10 car lengths behind, trying to tell himself he was only making sure she didn't break down. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the truth. He didn't understand what just happened, or why it had hit him so hard. Watching his mother walk up to that animal, offering to take him in like it was the most natural thing in the world, stirred something ugly inside him. She hadn't lifted a hand when he left. So why now? Why this horse? Why now? When they pulled into the gravel driveway, the house looked even smaller than Thatcher remembered. The paint was peeling. The porch sagged. The place smelled like old wood and wind. He watched his mother step out of the truck and walk slowly to the trailer, her cane thudding softly against the ground. She opened the latch, spoke no words, and waited. After a long pause, Bishop stepped out on his own. No force, no rope, just quiet consent. Thatcher felt his chest tighten. The horse didn't seem afraid. He seemed resigned. Inside the house, Iris cleared out the small mudroom near the kitchen, laying down old towels and blankets. It wasn't a stall, but the barn wasn't safe enough yet. Bishop didn't resist. He walked through the doorway with a strange grace, his hooves tapping softly on the wood floor. As the door shut behind him, Iris let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. The house had been silent for years, just the wind and the ticking clock. But now the silence was shared. That night, Thatcher sat in his truck, engine off, staring at the porch light. He should leave. He should go back to the city, back to the noise and numbness he knew so well. But something rooted him there. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the look in Bishop's eyes. Maybe it was the memory of a time when that house felt like home, before it all shattered. Inside, Iris sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames. Bishop lay nearby, not asleep, just watching. And in that strange, quiet moment, she whispered into the fire, "You're not the only one who's been left behind." Morning light crept through the torn curtains of Iris's kitchen window, casting soft streaks across the worn tile floor. She moved slowly, pouring warm oats into a dented metal bowl, her hands trembling only slightly. Bishop stood nearby, alert but still. He hadn't made a sound all night. Just breathing, deep, steady, present. She didn't speak to him. She didn't need to. There was something about his presence that softened the silence in the house. For years, the quiet had screamed at her. But now, it simply settled. Thatcher stepped inside uninvited, tracking mud onto the floorboards, a bag of feed slung over his shoulder. "Barn's worse than I remembered," he muttered, not looking at her. "One strong wind, and it'll collapse." Iris nodded once, then turned her attention back to Bishop. The horse looked up at Thatcher for only a second, then turned his head away slowly, uninterested. The gesture stung more than it should have. It was the kind of dismissal Thatcher had given people most of his adult life, and now here it was, staring back at him. "You don't even know how to take care of a horse anymore," Thatcher said quietly, not out of cruelty, but out of something more brittle. Fear, maybe. "This isn't a rescue. It's a delay." Iris didn't respond. She knelt beside Bishop with effort, placing the bowl down gently. "You think I don't know what broken looks like?" she finally said. "I've seen it in the mirror every day for 20 years. Her voice was low but firm. "He doesn't scare me. You do." Outside, Delphine Waverley stood near the fence, watching from a respectful distance. She had brought Maisie with her, hoping the girl might distract Iris with her endless questions. But Maisie wasn't in the mood to talk. She stood silently, hands gripping the fence rails, eyes fixed on Bishop. "He looks like he's waiting for something," Maisie said. Delphine looked down at her. "He is," she replied. "And I think Iris knows exactly what it is." Zeke Rourke showed up mid-morning with a small toolbox and 2 wooden beams. "Heard someone took in a ghost," he said, setting the materials near the barn without being asked. "Figured I'd help before the whole thing caves in." Thatcher nodded, surprised but grateful. The two men worked in silence for a while before Zeke added, "Sometimes, fixing the barn ain't about the barn." Thatcher didn't reply, but the words stayed with him. That evening, Iris sat beside Bishop, brushing what little she could of his tangled mane. Her fingers were slow but certain, and as she worked, she whispered, "You were somebody once." She paused, then added with a sigh, "So was I." Rain began falling just after sundown, soft at first, then steadier, like the sky had finally decided to grieve. Inside the half-fixed barn, the roof still leaked in places, but the old wood held firm under Zeke's repairs. Bishop stood near the open side door, staring out into the gray. His breathing was steady, but there was a tension in his posture, as if he recognized the sound of distant thunder as more than just weather. Iris stood a few feet away, her coat soaked from walking him in. She should have gone inside, but something about the way he watched the rain made her stay. Thatcher watched from the porch, arms crossed, heart restless. He hadn't planned to stay another day, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. The barn, the horse, his mother. It was all tangled now, in ways he didn't understand. Bishop had barely acknowledged him, and somehow that was worse than outright rejection. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by something with a face that seemed to see right through him. And yet, part of him wanted that gaze, wanted it to call him out, like it had done with her. Back inside the barn, Iris finally broke the silence. "He reminds me of your father," she said without looking back. Thatcher froze in the doorway. Stubborn, quiet, always staring at storms like he could outrun them. The words landed like stones between them. Iris turned toward her son slowly. "You never forgave me for how I handled it. I know that." Thatcher stayed still, rain dripping off the brim of his cap. "It wasn't just about him," he said. "It was about everything you never said after." Delphine had left earlier, promising to return with blankets. Maisie, however, had slipped away from her grandmother's side and wandered toward the barn. She didn't speak as she stepped inside, just stood quietly next to Bishop, who didn't flinch. She reached out a small hand and laid it gently against his side. The horse let out a slow exhale. Iris looked down at the girl. "You're not afraid of him?" Maisie shook her head. "He's not scary," she whispered. "He's just waiting for someone to understand." Zeke arrived shortly after, tracking mud as he entered. "Storm's gonna get worse," he said. "You two should come in." He looked at Bishop and nodded once, almost like a silent greeting. Then, glancing at Thatcher, he added, "Some things you can't rebuild with nails and wood. Gotta start with what's rotting inside." Thatcher said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Iris reached for a dry blanket and draped it gently over Bishop's back. "No one ever taught him how to trust," she murmured. "So he stopped trying. Just like the rest of us." The storm rolled through the hills with an anger that shook windows and rattled old barn doors. The lightning cracked across the sky like veins of fire, and for the first time since arriving, Bishop reacted. His body tensed, ears pinned back, and he took 2 heavy steps toward the wall. Iris reached for him instinctively, her palm brushing his neck, whispering, "It's just thunder." But it wasn't just thunder. Not to him. And not to her either. Some sounds don't just echo, they reopen. Thatcher stood in the kitchen, staring at the photograph still taped to the fridge, the only one that hadn't been taken down. It showed his father, younger than Thatcher was now, sitting atop a horse in that same barn. The smile on his face was real. Raw. He hadn't seen that smile again after the accident. Iris had kept everything so quiet afterward. Too quiet. She had buried her grief beneath routine, buried her love beneath silence. and he had learned to do the same, until it turned him into someone he didn't even recognize. Back in the barn, Bishop stomped once, snorting, nostrils flared. Maisie, who had come to check on him, stepped back in alarm. Iris knelt beside her quickly. "It's okay," she said gently. "He's remembering something, that's all." Maisie looked up. "Is that what we do when we're scared? Remember?" Iris hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes the things we remember are worse than what's happening right now. But remembering is how we stop pretending." Zeke appeared again without warning, soaked to the bone. "Thought you might need another pair of hands," he said, wiping water from his eyes. He moved toward Bishop, speaking low and steady, not touching him yet, just being present. Bishop's breathing slowed. Iris looked at Zeke. "You've seen this before." Zeke nodded. "War horse," he said. "Saw too much. Felt too much. Then someone told him to forget. That never works." Outside, Thatcher finally stepped out onto the porch. The rain had slowed, but the air was heavy, full of tension that hadn't yet broken. He looked toward the barn, saw movement. Iris, Zeke, Maisie, and Bishop. Something about that silhouette pulled him in. He couldn't explain it. He didn't want to. But he knew if he turned away now, he'd carry that same silence for the rest of his life. Inside, Iris ran her hand once more down Bishop's back. "You were trained to hold pain," she whispered, "and so were we." The barn creaked, thunder rolled in the distance, and for the first time, Bishop whinnied. Thatcher stepped into the barn just before sunrise. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and hay, and the quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was expectant. Bishop stood in the far corner, his dark coat glistening slightly in the early light. He turned his head at the sound of footsteps but didn't retreat. Instead, he watched. Thatcher stopped a few feet away, unsure. "I don't know what you are to her," he said quietly, "but you've taken my place." Iris, leaning against one of the support beams, heard the words but didn't respond immediately. She was tired. Not in her bones, but in her soul, a kind of tired that no sleep could touch. "You never lost your place," she said eventually. "You just stopped standing in it." Thatcher turned toward her, his face hard. "You never gave me a reason to stay." Her eyes narrowed. "And you never gave me a chance to explain." There it was, the crack. The old wound neither had dared touch in years. Bishop shifted his weight, the wooden floor groaning beneath him. Iris took a deep breath, stepping forward. "The night your father died, I wasn't just grieving him. I was grieving the version of our family I thought we'd be. And when you started to drift away, I didn't have it in me to pull you back. I should have. But I didn't." Her voice broke, and she didn't try to hide it. Thatcher stood still, arms limp at his sides. The words hit harder than he expected. "I thought you blamed me," he said. "I thought that's why you stopped talking." Iris shook her head. "I never blamed you. I blamed myself. For being too weak. For not showing you that it was okay to hurt." She looked toward Bishop. "He reminded me what grief can do when it sits too long in silence. It turns into something that stops moving. Stops living." Zeke entered quietly, carrying 2 fresh bales of hay. He didn't say anything at first, just watched the way mother and son stood, the distance between them closing not with steps, but with truth. "You ever notice," he finally said, breaking the moment gently, "how barns hold more than animals? They hold stories. Some folks just forget to listen." He set the hay down and gave Bishop a long look. "Some stories kick the walls till someone hears." Maisie entered a moment later, carrying a bucket of water. She placed it near Bishop, who lowered his head to drink, slowly, calmly. Then, for the first time since the auction, Bishop took a step forward. Just one. Toward Thatcher. And it was enough. For the first time in days, the sun rose clean over the hills, burning off the last mist of the storm. Dew clung to the grass like tiny memories refusing to let go. Iris stood outside the barn with a cup of coffee in her hand, her fingers wrapped tightly around the mug as if holding something fragile. Inside, Bishop grazed on hay without hesitation. His shoulders weren't as tense, his eyes not as hollow. Small changes, but changes all the same. Thatcher leaned against the porch railing, watching quietly. He hadn't left. Something about the stillness of the place, the slowness, had taken hold of him. He didn't know what came next, or if anything really changed between them. But this morning, his mother had handed him the feed bucket without saying a word, and he had taken it. Sometimes healing didn't need a speech. Sometimes it was just two people doing the next right thing, side by side. Delphine arrived later that morning with Maisie, both carrying old blankets and a fresh loaf of bread. "Thought you might need warmth and carbs," she joked, but her eyes scanned the place like a quiet observer of miracles. Bishop stepped forward when Maisie approached, no longer guarded. The girl smiled wide and pressed her forehead gently to his neck. "He doesn't feel like a ghost anymore," she whispered. Iris nodded. "He never was. We just didn't know how to look." Zeke helped finish reinforcing the barn, adding new boards where the old ones threatened to give way. As he hammered, he spoke to Thatcher without looking up. "You stickin' around?" he asked casually. Thatcher shrugged. "For now." Zeke chuckled. "That's how it starts. For now turns into something you didn't know you needed." Then he looked over his shoulder. "Places like this don't just hold you. They remind you of who you were before the noise." Inside the house, Iris placed an old photo back on the mantel, one she had stored away years ago. It showed Thatcher, age 6, holding a colt with his father beside him. No one was posed. They were laughing. Alive. She stared at it for a long moment before lighting a fire beneath the kettle. It was time to stop pretending those years never existed. Time to let them live again, as they were, imperfect but real. As the day drew to a close, Bishop stood beneath the sky, ears forward, body calm. He no longer watched the horizon like it held danger. He stood with them, not apart. And somewhere deep in his bones, and in theirs, a question was finally answered. What if coming back was never about the place, but about the people who stayed to meet you there? A week passed. Then 2. The days began to blend together in the way only quiet, rural days can, with morning light creeping over fields, the smell of damp soil, and the comforting rhythm of chores. Bishop had settled into the farm like he had always belonged there. His gait was still cautious, but the wild panic had faded from his eyes. He no longer looked like something trying to disappear. He looked like something learning how to stay. Iris moved easier now, even if her body still ached. She woke with purpose. Fed Bishop before coffee. Opened windows. Aired out rooms she hadn't stepped into in years. And every now and then she caught herself humming, just softly, almost without knowing. The weight she had carried for decades had not vanished, but it had shifted. Grief had changed shape. It had become something she could walk beside, rather than drag behind her. Thatcher had stayed. No big declarations. No promises. Just presence. He worked on the barn during the day, fixed the fence, cleaned out the shed. In the evenings, he sat on the porch with Iris, sipping coffee or just watching the horizon. They didn't talk much about the past anymore, not because it didn't matter, but because the silence between them had softened. Sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's just two people sitting in the same quiet, and not needing it to be anything more. Maisie visited often, always with questions and wild stories. Bishop followed her like a shadow now, trusting her in a way he hadn't trusted anyone since the auction. Delphine watched from a distance, knowing better than to interfere with what was clearly meant to be. "You saved each other," she told Iris one afternoon. "All of you. You just needed the right mirror to see it." One evening, as the sun dipped below the ridge, Iris stood by Bishop in the field. The air was golden and still, heavy with that late summer hush. She placed her hand on his neck and whispered, "You brought my boy home." Bishop didn't move. But he didn't need to. Just being there, quiet and breathing, was enough. And when the wind picked up, brushing gently across the grass, it didn't sound like a storm anymore. It sounded like a memory, one that didn't hurt to carry. Because in the end, it wasn't about the horse that was broken, or the woman, or the son. It was about what they chose to rebuild together. And some things, once rebuilt the right way, never fall again.